Hello and welcome to the Wednesday, January 21st, 2026 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, recording today from Jacksonville, Florida. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Graduate Certificate Program in Penetration Testing and Ethical Hacking. A good reminder today from Xavier to, don't forget to look for international domain names in your DNS logs. There are some legitimate international domain names, and of course, how many of them you'll see depends somewhat on your users, which websites they frequent. But international domain names also have the unfortunate ability to impersonate the more commonly used ASCII domain names. And that's exactly what Xavier is looking for here. If you have a non-ASCII domain name, the label starts with XN --. So that's one thing to look for. In particular, if the top-level domain name is not a international top-level domain, but a standard ASCII domain, that's often a hint that something fishy is going on here, as in someone attempting to impersonate a particular website. So take a look at that. However, how effective this particular attack is also very much depends on the browser your users are using. Safari tends to be a little bit more vulnerable here in that it's more likely to actually display those non-ASCII characters, while a lot of other browsers, Chrome is sort of the big other browser, is typically showing the Punycode, which means the domain is then displayed with the XN ---- prefix and no non-ASCII characters are being displayed. So take a look at domain names or the domain logs and see if you find anything interesting. And I always kind of like these vulnerabilities in old software that have been around for decades. This particular vulnerability has been around for exactly a decade, was introduced in March of 2015, and it affects the InetUtils version of the telnet daemon. Now, nobody should be running telnet anymore, but in particular in IoT environments and such, it's still sadly somewhat common. And in this particular case, it's the telnet daemon that's started by inetd. So you have inetd that really listens for incoming connections and then on demand starts various small services like, for example, telnetd. And as part of this, it's possible to pass a user variable to the telnet daemon that's then being passed without any kind of sanitation to the actual login shell. And here a user can just pass the root username and with that become easily root. Interesting vulnerability, no CVE assigned to it. I haven't tested myself. I'd have to find a version of telnetd that I actually still have around. But looks very plausible. So if you're running inetd, first of all, just turn off telnet. There is no real reason why you should still be running telnet, but definitely make sure that you also update just in case it's getting enabled again later. And Let's Encrypt announced that they concluded their testing on shorter-lived certificates and are making them now available for everybody. Now, at this point, short-lived certificates are an option if you would like to use them, and they are only valid for 6 days. Then you need to select the short-lived certificate profile, and only more recent Acme clients actually support different certificate profiles. The default is still 90 days for Let's Encrypt certificates. What comes with the short-lived certificates, and that's one reason why you may want to select them, is that you now also have the ability to get a certificate for an IP address, not just for a host name. Personally, I don't see a great use case, sort of at least for the more general use of IP-based certificates. I prefer to use host names anyway to connect to different resources. It gives you a lot more flexibility. But the one sort of use case that's often cited here is if you're trying to do things like DNS over HTTPS or DNS over QUIC, then of course that DNS server needs a certificate, and the client may not be able to look up the IP address based on a host name because it needs a DNS server to do so. So that may be one use case where you would like to use an IP address-based certificate. Again, they're only valid for 6 days, and the default hasn't changed. If you get a default certificate that's valid for 90 days, then you must use a host name. You are not able to use an IP address. And Oracle today released the first quarterly critical patch update for the year. This update fixes a total of 337 vulnerabilities. The one vulnerability I saw sort of recurring from multiple products is the Apache Tika vulnerability that was patched, I think, a month ago and is rated with a CVSS score of 10 for many of the products. This also affects the Oracle Fusion middleware, which has two additional, two of these three vulnerabilities are Tika related and rated with a 10. And then there's a third vulnerability that's also rated with a CVSS score of 10. So definitely pay attention to this. This Tika vulnerability has been around for a while, so haven't seen an exploit for it yet, but very possible that there is already an exploit circulating. So definitely get this patched and make sure you're not exposing more than you have to. Well, and this is it for today. So thanks for listening. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing to this podcast. And as always, thanks and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.